Hi everyone, my name is Nishan Pillay and welcome to a live broadcast from the Gordon Institute of Business Science in Johannesburg, Ilovo. I'm coming to you from our studios. And today we're talking about something really interesting, which is the fourth industrial revolution. And with me, I have Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, who is the Vice-chancellor and principal of the University of Johannesburg. Professor has also served as a trustee of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and he is now deputy to President Cyril Ramaphosa on the South African Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is a very exciting commission that our president has put together, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it as we go on. Today, so we'll talk about Professor's book called Closing the Gap, which I must say is an extremely interesting read. Professor, welcome to GIBS and to our studios.
No, thank you very much, Nish, for the invitation, and also I would like to greet your listeners.
Wonderful. Professor, you are no stranger to writing books. You've written well into 20 books already, a lot in the technical area. Tell me why this particular book, Closing the Gap, and specifically focused on the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, I have been trying to get my work accessible to as many of our people as possible. And many of the books that I've written have been directed at the technical people. Starting from sometimes in 2017, I started thinking about writing a book that is for the general public. And in 2017, with Evan Hurwitz, we wrote a book called Skynet in the Market, which is quite a readable book, but the mistake that we made was that we used a word Skynet. When you use words like Skynet, you are basically chasing away the audience. And secondly, towards the end of the book, we couldn't help but put mathematical equations. So, and thirdly, the publisher was Springer. Springer is a highly technical publisher. So we've been thinking about how do we make our work more accessible to the person who is not an expert. And I think when Mandy Winner suggested that I do this, I took the challenge, and I think this is a good book.
You know, I'm a big Terminator fan, so Skynet definitely would have appealed to me. But I understand what you're saying around the fear-mongering that a lot of the time, and you've spoken about in your book about movies and the fear-mongering for years and years around the fourth industrial revolution. Just so everyone is aware, those of you joining us on LinkedIn, please, we're very happy to take questions. So please pop any comments and questions you have onto the chat. You know, we can learn from one another as much as you can learn from ourselves. So the importance of the fourth industrial revolution for South Africa and the continent, we've perhaps, as you've expressed in your book, we've perhaps missed the train on the last couple of revolutions. Why is this particular, the 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution, why is this revolution so important for us?
Well, I think this revolution is important because the barriers to entry are much, much lower than in the past industrial revolution. Just think about how to establish a chemical plant. Firstly, you probably will have to have several billion rands in your bank account in order to build the infrastructure. If you wanted to establish an electronic manufacturing plant, again, you know, the amount of initial capital outlay that you have to put into place is quite substantial. But when you come to the fourth industrial revolution, which is really about embedding intelligence into production, 3D printers, then the barriers of entry are actually quite low. You can pretty much sit down, write a few lines of code, and build an app and have a business, and you have established a business. And even if you look at some of the fourth industrial revolution companies such as Twitter, they were not made by many people. Apparently the people who were involved in the making of Twitter were less than 700. Might even have been less than that. You know? So the barrier to entry is not prohibitive. Because of that, we have to participate, because If we skill ourselves, if we get the right skills, then we can be able to participate fully in this revolution.
Professor, you know what I loved about your book is that you've taken, often the fourth industrial revolution is filled with jargon. It's filled with terms that a lot of people don't understand, and it's traditionally been that way. What I loved about your book is you took simple concepts, you talked about some simple ideas, and then as the book went on, you advanced those ideas into ethics, into politics, into movies, and I think it gives access to people around the principles of the fourth industrial revolution. And why I mention that is because you've also said that we don't have to master the first, second, and third revolution in order to be successful in the fourth industrial revolution. And often that's what people don't understand, is that they feel, well, if you've missed the boat, well, what's the chances of catching up? And you've stated that actually you don't have to catch up. We just have to understand what we need to do as a continent, as a country in the fourth industrial revolution. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I am passionate about is the issue of producing knowledge effectively, IP, you know. And one of the IP that we have produced is devising an artificial larynx. In fact, it was covered by the MIT Technology Review. And if you just look at the device, it's not complicated, you know. Of course, it became expensive when we went to United States to apply for the patent, you know. So, and it was solving the problems that we see. And when you look around ourselves, whether it is here in Johannesburg, we have many, many problems. The Google Translate functionality does not translate our languages very well. That is a business opportunity. And part of the reason why it doesn't is because the people who created it were not isiZulu speakers or Chivenda speakers, and as a consequence, they were not able to capture the language with all its intricacies. So it is quite important for us to look around, look for problems, and try to use these technologies to resolve those problems.
It's interesting because what you mention now is a cultural context. It's a context that if you're in Europe or America and you're programming and you're coding, you don't understand. You don't understand a body language cue, maybe the way the sentence structure is, or one word could mean 3 or 4 different things. And often, I mean, we've got official languages that are in double digits, which is often not the case for a lot of other countries. The question is, do we work with the companies outside the American companies, Google, Facebook, do we work with them to be able to improve their systems, or do you think we create our own systems?
I think we should do both. I think we should have people who are working with them so that the concept of skills transfer actually does happen. But we should also do our own individual applications. I still supervise students. I have 5 PhD students, and 2 of them are Google Fellows, which basically means they are funded by Google. And they have a mentor in United States. Each one of them has a mentor. The concept of knowledge transfer is very, very important in this era. So we must do both. But if you only just do one and not the other, then you are not going to be as competitive as you would otherwise have been, you know. If you look at the developments in China, the sort of applications that they have come up with, whether it is Didi, whether it is, you can see that it was somebody who went and saw how Facebook looks like, or Twitter looks like, and came and contextualized it in a very different context that Google could not otherwise have been able to do, because simply they do not have enough people who can write in Chinese characters, for example. So the idea of looking at yourself and identifying the competitive edge, aspects, attributes that will make you differentiate yourself from what Facebook can be able to do, is where we should actually position ourselves.
It's interesting because you talk about this principle, cooking the rice inside and outside the same pot. And I love the reference to it because it's what you're talking about, which is you've got to do both. You've got to work internally to increase your capabilities for IR, but you have to work with external people. If I take that principle of external, on the continent, which country do you think is leading the charge in terms of fourth industrial revolution? What are the good examples?
Well, I wouldn't want to position one country over another. I have been quite impressed with what I have seen in Rwanda. They are using drones to deliver medicines to rural areas, and I've become very intimate to what they are doing. I am the chairperson of the Africa Center for Internet of Things, which is a government agency in Rwanda, based at the University of Rwanda. And so I see what is happening. So I'm very impressed with what is happening in Rwanda. I think there is actually an impressive ecosystem in Kenya. I think if you go to Cape Town and Johannesburg in South Africa, we have people who are doing some very interesting fourth industrial revolution projects. I've been to Ghana. Ghana, very, very important work that is happening there. Yes, it might not necessarily be indigenous because Google has invested a $1 billion AI lab in Ghana. It's not at a university, it's an independent lab of Google, and they have brought in people from outside who are experts in the field, so that they can make sense of the African database and put it into AI applications. So I think we have pockets of excellence. I have not looked into what is happening in the other big part of the African continent. It's something that now I am looking at, so that I can be able to understand what is going on.
And it's interesting because the capabilities. So, for instance, you mentioned Rwanda and the drone and drone initiatives. Piloting a drone is not an easy task. It takes a lot of experience. And I know that a lot of people are looking at Rwanda because they're starting to create capabilities around piloting drones, which actually could be used globally. It's a skill set that actually could be used globally because that capability is being created. So it's good to see some pockets of excellence. And I think as a continent, we do have to learn from each other, right?
Absolutely.
And we have to be able to maximize that.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I actually think that it is much easier to automate movement of drones than to train pilots to be able to do it. Or you go to some room where it's almost like you're playing a game. I think automation is going to dominate that market. We need to see how do we insert ourselves in that value chain of drones and the use of drones in transporting goods and services, and the fact that simply because unless you are dealing with very expensive goods that are being transferred, the cost of losing whatever you are moving tends to be offset by automation, rather than having biological human beings piloting the drones.
So let's talk about automation. So a lot of people in a country that has a high unemployment rate, automation reflects to some degree a replacement of a job. And if you just look at it, it's replacing one person with automation. Whether you look at RPA process, robotic process automation, you're replacing I won't say mundane tasks, but routine work. You replace routine work. Yeah. What is your view on the context and the trade-off between a country with high unemployment and moving towards automating as part of the fourth industrial revolution?
I think when you automate, the most important issue is competitiveness. Because if you are not competitive, you are not going to hold on to the jobs that you think you're going to hold by retaining human beings. We know of the textile industry in South Africa that has completely died. If you had gone to Doornfontein here, it was an area where the textile industry was thriving. But when the goods that came out of China became much, much cheaper than we could produce here in South Africa, guess what happened? All those jobs disappeared. Why did they disappear? Because a South African consumer is not patriotic when they consume. When they go and buy goods and services, they don't even look where the goods are from. They don't go and say, okay, is it made in South Africa? If it is made in South Africa, I will buy it irrespective of the fact that it is 3 times the cost of another. No, they go for the best price. So it is not a choice. It is a matter of competitiveness, and if you are not competitive, you are going to, the market forces, the forces of demand and supply are going to throw you out of the market. So what we ought to do as South Africans, we ought to do that which will make us competitive. It is clear that the cost of labor is a big impediment to competitiveness for our industries. So it is quite important that we automate. Before I came back to academia to brew students, I actually used to brew beer at South African breweries. I was the executive assistant to the technical director then, many, many years ago. I mean, this is more than 20 years ago. And at that point, in Port Elizabeth, they used to have a brewery that used to employ about 4,000 people. It was automated, not now, then, 20 years ago. And it could be operated by less than 50 people. You know, and those 50 people with automation were producing much more efficiently the beer than the 4,000 people. And this trend is going to repeat itself. And what we ought to do is, how do we prepare our people so that they are not just spectators in such an economy, so that they are actually full participants?
That's very, I mean, you're absolutely right, where the statistics are showing that when you implement automation or RPA or AI, you actually can create more jobs. So there's certain jobs, there's certain titles that we are not necessarily educating people for. And you speak about skill sets. We need to advance skill sets to not be left behind. So you say automation is going to happen. It has to happen.
It's going to happen.
And what we have to do is make sure our people are kept up.
Absolutely.
So that they don't lose a place in the economy, that they find a place in the economy.
Absolutely.
But there are several implications when you think about automation, and one of them is regulations. And so we have companies that operate in South Africa that don't necessarily have premises here. So you talk about Uber, you talk about Netflix. There's regulations around taxation. There's several discussions around how do you combat automation. So you tax robot workers. What is your feeling? How do you ultimately balance the automation versus the person, the employee, from a regulation perspective?
Well, I mean, we have a big recommendation of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is to direct our lawmakers to start making laws that will be able to deal with issues of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Of course, there probably are going to be problems because for you to do it well, your members of parliament must actually be technologically literate. I'm not too sure whether they are technologically literate. I saw the CEO of Google and the CEO of Facebook facing the American Congress, and you could see the asymmetry of knowledge between the two on matters of technology. And you can imagine, if we repeat the same conversation between the tech people in South Africa and our parliamentarians, I think it will be a one-sided affair. I'm not going to confess who is going to have the upper hand. You know who is going to have an upper hand. So we need to regulate. Now, on your specific issue, the issue of do you tax robots or not? And by the way, when I read about Bill Gates advocating taxing robots, I knew that he probably did not really mean it. And the reason for that is because when you think of robots, you think about a humanoid, or what you see in industries. Robotic features are everywhere in our phones. There are robotic features. When you open Microsoft Word, the fact that you probably do not have somebody here at GIBS who is employed to correct your spelling, because Microsoft Word is able to do that. That is automation. Now, how do you begin to text that? So it is quite difficult to text that. So I'm not an advocate of taxing the robots. Now, I have done a piece of a paper to say, now what will be the impact of automation? And one of the impact that I have identified is that it's going to result in a lesser collection of tax revenue. Because you are going to remove from the tax revenue a line of individual tax that was paid by people who were in formal employment. I have to use formal employment because in South Africa we have not even found a mechanism of taxing informal employment. Then you're going to have a reduction in that. And Elon Musk, a South African technologist based in Silicon Valley, has advocated that in an era where governments are going to be less powerful because they are going to collect less taxes, how do you make people still have a good standard of living? In fact, we know that whole setup of reduction in tax revenue, reduction in employment, is going to result in the reduction in the aggregate demand. And if you have a reduction in the aggregate demand, the whole economic system of demand and supply, capitalism, is going to face a crisis. So he advocates universal basic income. And I see people in the ANC talking about universal basic income. I don't think those are the solutions. I think these are complicated issues and you need people who actually understand what they're talking about. And it has to be people who understand systems thinking. Because once you change one lever, it has all sorts of implications on industries that you have not even thought about.
You mentioned recommendations. The Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission that you deputy chair on has been an exciting commission. And you mentioned one recommendation now that was given forward. What are some of the more exciting recommendations that have been put forward? And maybe exciting is the wrong word. What are some of the more important recommendations that have been actually put forward from the Commission's perspective that we need to actually keep an eye out?
So I think all the 8 recommendations are very, very important. I mean, the recommendation about human capacity development in the areas of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, very, very important, because there's a lot of confusion. People think we are going to master the Fourth Industrial Revolution by starting to teach people how to code. I say, don't teach people how to code. Teach them communication skills, especially in English, because, the syntax is done in English. Teach them mathematical skills. Teach them logical skills, the ability to be able to connect things and see the flow of things and so on and so forth. If they have those 3 core skills, then robotics becomes easy, then programming becomes easy. Then we have a recommendation about the National AI Institute. And we have already had a national AI dialogue, which was attended by over 2,000 people and over 200 companies, where we are saying, how do we come together and apply this AI technology in all aspects of our economy, in agriculture and so on and so forth? Then the issue of industrialization is very important. Manufacturing is a very important part of our economy. It's only 13% of our economy, but it could increase. But you are not going to do it unless you invest into the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, automation, and so on and so forth. Then we have issues around data. Everybody now is saying, if you read, they say data is the new oil. If it is the new oil, it means you have to start counting how much of it is being drilled out of South Africa, whether it is by Twitter or Facebook and so on and so forth. You probably even need to think about how you are going to tax that extraction of data, very, very important. Then we have a recommendation around incentives. One economist was once asked a question, summarize the whole of economics in one word. And his answer was incentives. With incentives, you have demand and supply, and so on and so forth. What are these incentives? They can be in the form of tax breaks if you are a small and medium enterprise and you are investing into capabilities of artificial intelligence, blockchain, and other FOIR technologies. Maybe you should get tax breaks. Of course, now you hear about special economic zones. I'm not even sure whether our government understands what it is for. When Deng Xiaoping introduced special economic zones in China, it was an incentive scheme because everybody knew that China was a socialist country and capitalists were not going to invest in a socialist country. So he just said, okay, we'll have these places called the special economic zones where you can come and operate as if you are in United States, And of course, that has worked for China, Then we have a recommendation around regulations, very, very important. Then we have a recommendation around implementation because we are wary of the fact that South Africans speak more than they do. We are a nation of speakers rather than doers. We need to become nations of doers. And I believe that the doing part cannot be done just by government. It has to be government and the private sector. And the role of the private sector cannot be emphasized enough simply because there's simply too much knowledge in that private sector compared to the public sector. I know many people might differ with me on ideological grounds, but I think we need to learn to separate truth from facts.
And this private, I'm seeing lots of comments, and thank you for all the comments. And a lot of it is around how do we fast track the right capabilities. And you've just mentioned, a lot of it sits in the private sector. Mm-hmm. And so fast tracking is the partnership. I would imagine the partnership is how we're going to fast track.
No, absolutely. There's another interesting concept that I did talk about it in one of the op-eds on Sunday Times, where I say part of the reason why South Africa has really fallen behind is this phenomenon called politicism. This culture that we have created that basically says that the politics actually is the most important aspect. It's a very important aspect. But technology is also even more important, and so on and so forth. So we need to create a society where leadership is balanced. You will have political leaders, very, very important. You are going to have community leaders, just as important, because we know that our education system is failing. Part of the reason is because our communities are very, very weak. You will have to have business leaders, and that balance is very, very important. Once you have politics being dominating the other factor, that is politicism. If you have business dominating the sector, then you have a problem also. So there has to be a balance, and there has to be constant communication between all these centers of power. And if we are able to get the right balance, we are actually going to implement some of these recommendations that I'm talking about.
So let me throw out a statement to yourself and also to everyone watching. And I'll invite comments and questions around this. So we're both in education, and education is quite interesting. We've spoken about skills and capabilities. Do you think that AI will disrupt the educated first?
No, absolutely. But I will also have to add that we do emphasize the primary the importance of AI. I did a PhD at Cambridge in AI 23 years ago, so I've been in this field for a long time. To know that there's not really been much progress in AI. No, it's not as much as we thought. Yeah, you have generative adversarial networks and so on and so forth that probably did not exist. They definitely did not exist when I was doing AI. I think technology is broader than AI. I think AI is important for automation, But I think control systems is important for automation, because ultimately, once AI has decided that some good has to move from one place to another, you will have to action that decision. So control systems becomes very, very important. So when we are training people so that they can be able to be full participants in this era, my take at it is that you need to give people education in its totality. What do I mean by that? I mean that those who are doing social and human sciences must at the same time also do technology. And those who are doing technological disciplines must at the same time also do human and social sciences. Here at the University of Johannesburg, one of the innovations that we have done is to introduce an introductory AI course, which everybody who is a student must actually complete before they graduate. It's not part of their curriculum, but it's part of their requirement for them to graduate. And they get 2 certificates. They will get a certificate in AI because they have completed the course, but they will also get a degree in psychology. Yes, we don't teach you to become a programmer because it is for the general. We teach you to understand what it is about, where it has been applied, what has been the result. So it's not a mathematical or a computer science course. It is a course for the general public, So I think that is what we have to do in education. Give people education in its totality.
So you said the previous traditional models of education are now being disrupted. As you've said, it's including certain skill sets that are relevant.
Absolutely.
Are we saying that the people that have come out of the system, they must be aware that they must supplement their skills?
In fact, adult-based education, because adult-based education in South Africa traditionally meant you go to a community, you look for people who can read and write, and you teach them how to read and write. We know that literacy today is no longer just the ability to read and write. Technological literacy is becoming very, very important for our economy. So adult-based education to deal with issues of literacy will have to also target people who already have degrees. Very, very important.
Veronica has a good question related, and she says, interesting times ahead, but how will they make sure that they do not leave the poorest of the poor in rural areas who do not even have network coverage? How do we prevent digital inequality?
By investing. You have to invest in digital infrastructure. Because if you are coming from, I come from a rural area, but connectivity is actually quite good. I'm impressed that I can be able to take out my device and I can be able to pretty much work. In fact, I can go to my village during the COVID and do all the meetings I'm supposed to do, So investment is very, very important. Nothing is going to come out if we do not invest. But people must also invest their time. Because it will mean that in a rural area, you must have somebody who will come, who understands this technology, get people together and start teaching them about the technologies. It might also mean that some of the materials that is already available on the internet in English, somebody might actually have to translate them into local languages so that people can be able to read and understand, So we actually need to actively invest in moving our people to the digital age.
But it is a genuine risk that digital transformation, the fourth industrial revolution, can potentially widen the gap between the ones that have and the ones that don't have. Purely, if you look at an example like a factory, a very successful, profitable factory, then have the capital to invest in automation, to invest in the technologies, and potentially then advances much further beyond perhaps a small manufacturer who might not have the capital. So is it a risk, though, that you could widen that gap?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the consequences, unintended consequences of the fourth industrial revolution is the widening of inequality. I wrote an article on A Tale of Two Worlds. That was after I read Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And techno-feudalism. Because we tend to think that feudalism is something that happened in Europe before the 1700s, you know. It is coming back in a much more sophisticated way, in a technological way, you know. And how do we deal with that? So the issue of inequality has to be addressed. And it is not just going to be addressed, it is going to be addressed by making sure that our people are also quite adequately educated enough to be able to handle the complexity of the world that they live in. It will mean that our governments have to become much, much more techno-governments, governments that understand technology, its evolution and its implications, and govern appropriately so that the people cannot be left behind. So these are not really the solutions because this is absolutely a very complicated matter, but I think they do help us to start tackling these problems.
Malusi has an interesting question for you specifically, Professor. If you were asked by the President to serve as Minister of Communications, Telecommunications and Postal, would you consider it?
No. I would say, Mr. President, I am doing, I think I'm doing a fantastic job looking after 52,000 students at the University of Johannesburg, but I am going to support any other person that you are going to deem appropriate to become a minister of telecommunication so that they can be able to do their work. And I have worked very, very well with the current Minister of Communications. I think on the issue of spectrum, she's doing fantastic work, you know. And as educational institutions, we must have our own slice of the cake when it comes to spectrum, because it is important for learning, you know. So absolutely.
There you go, Malus. There we go. Straight. You get a straight answer here. You get direct contact to straight answers here. So, Professor, let me ask you: the recent health crisis, COVID, the global health crisis, has advanced a lot of adoption of technology. Do you think it's advanced our adoption of, or our advancement in the fourth industrial revolution, and in what way?
No, I mean, if you think about it, all these applications that we are using, whether it is Zoom, whether it is Microsoft Teams, they really are the fourth industrial revolution devices. You know, when you put a wall, what do you call the virtual background, you know, that thing that makes sure that your face is separated from the background, it's actually AI, you know. So at the least, it has made all of us appreciate digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, because we are now not just reading about it, we are living in it. But has it been able to do that in a sophisticated manner? No. I think the Zoom of the future, the teams of the future will have to involve virtual reality, where you can actually be able to sit in a room and get a hologram of you sitting there as if you are here, you know, and somebody else as if they're here, and then the interaction becomes much more effective than when they are on a 2D screen.
Absolutely. I mean, I was seeing a video of the last President Obama, ex-President Obama and Oprah, and they were having an interview, but really across a green screen. They were not in the same room.
Exactly.
But you're right. So, but I do think that it's reduced the fear. And a lot about fourth industrial revolution is change management. And if you're able to reduce the fear, you hopefully can increase the implementation or the adoption of it.
Absolutely.
We've come to the end, and I hope everyone's enjoyed the discussion. What is your parting words, one on the book, and two just generally around the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, on the book, I think you should go and buy the book. I think it's an exciting book. I use many of the lessons that my grandmother used to teach me. She was an excellent engineer. Today, as I was coming here, I was remembering when we would go and visit my aunt, and there was a river, and sometimes she would say, this river has too many veins, we can't cross. You know, what she really meant was that the river flow is turbulent. Later learned that is when there's too much vein in the river. You know, it's a turbulent flow, and if you get in, you will probably be overpowered and you might die. You know, so I think you should buy this book. And my parting shot is that be open-minded, learn. Don't hesitate to unlearn things that are no longer true, you know, because when you are learning about technology, every now and then things are no longer true. When you are learning about science, we get better science all the time. It's relearning, unlearning, and relearning and unlearning. That is the loop. And if you do that, you are going to conquer this era in which we are in.
Yeah, I mean, I love the story about the clay pot tapping. Which is also a story that you brought in. So you're right, it absolutely is. You can feel that it's a personal. So fourth industrial revolution, not just the experience that you have, which you have mountains of, but it's personal. It's something that you believe in. And I'm quite passionate about the fourth industrial revolution. And thank you to everyone for joining us and for actually in a small way upskilling themselves in the fourth industrial revolution, because to the point, it really is not about the technology, it's about the people. And the technology will be enabled by those people that take the effort to upskill themselves and make themselves relevant in the future disruption that is definitely coming, as we've talked about. Thank you so much for joining us and for engaging with us today.
Thank you very much.
Great.